If there's anything the Happy Tree Friends community loves to argue about, it's most definitely the show's characters. Unlike most shows, which have a small handful of main characters that usually lead each and every episode, Happy Tree Friends episodes can star or omit any of the main characters, depending on what the episode needs. Despite them all ranging in importance and spotlight, they're all main characters and have just as much a right to being the main character, even if it's just for one episode. Due to it being a topic ripe for analysis, I wanted to go through every main character, discussing their usage in the show and how they evolved over time. And while yes, this video is exactly that, I felt that just doing the main characters wasn't quite enough. We'll be talking about every single character, within reasonable limits. This is not exhaustive, as depending on what you consider a character, this could get bloated very quickly. Like, yeah, you could consider this random bird a character, but what is there to talk about it? My basic ruling was that if a character is recurring, story relevant, or even just named, they generally count for the list. And of course, I tried to trim the fat wherever I could. So, with all that said, this is the history and an analysis of every Happy Tree Friends character. To start, we'll be looking at the 4 original characters that all debuted in the first episode of the series, Spin Fun Knowin Ya. Why is this video just 4 characters and not all of them? Look at the runtime. We're gonna be here a while. Let's begin with the mascot of the series and the first character to ever be created for it, Cuddles the rabbit. Cuddles is by far the most prominent character in the show as a property, being featured in basically all of the promo material and branding, as well as being in the vast majority of merch sets and video games. If the show has a big event of any kind, you can be sure that Cuddles is gonna be there. He stars in the Fall Out Boy music video, he had an entire mascot costume made for him which was used several times for public events, and in general, there's basically nowhere in the show's history where Cuddles isn't at least mildly important. Though for some reason Cuddles was not in False Alarm, the show's one big console game. He's in the files, but not in the actual game. It's kinda weird. Furthering his importance to the show, Cuddles is where the show's style began, with this sketch by Rody Mondijo, which was placed around the Mondo Media offices to drum up interest in the show before it was greenlit. This actually worked, and the show was given a pilot. That's only 30 seconds long, and yet it's actually perfectly representative of what the show would be. Banjo Frenzy. I'll talk more about this short when we get to some of the other characters on the roster, but as you can see, an early version of Cuddles can be seen in this short, with the notable differences being his color, as well as missing his signature cheeks and slippers. Cuddles is absolutely the show's mascot. There's no argument there. But he's really not that relevant in the show itself. He's in the show, make no mistake, and he has plenty of starring roles, but in general, he's not the major influence you would expect him to be. This is probably due to the fact that his personality isn't really that strong. Whenever the show just needs a generic character to fill a non-specific role, Cuddles is commonly the one to do it, and this makes it so that while he does have many moments to himself, not all of them could have only been done with him. That's not to say he has no character, it's just not always on display. In these cases, Cuddles is portrayed as a rowdy kid whose antics often get him into trouble. He's ultimately friendly, he's not mean or anything, but he sometimes does things that bend the rules if he thinks it's fun. The best displays of this personality, if you ask me, are A to Zoo, where he and Toothy poke and prod at the animals, and In a Jam, his one and only starring role in the TV series. This episode shows that he has a major interest in rock music, and has a little bit of an ego, confidently playing guitar horribly in hopes of becoming a band member. Once he gets the job by sheer luck, he messes with the lights and stage controls to his liking mid-session, leading to several casualties, including his own. It's a shame he didn't get too many chances to show off this side of him, as it's quite fun when it's around, and it really makes him shine as his own character. Cuddles is frequently seen with Toothy, and the two often act in tandem as best friends, like in the aforementioned A to Zoo, where they are basically identical. Though if there's any character he's closely associated with the most, it's probably Giggles. Now the show doesn't really do romance in any serious sense, but when the show needs to portray love for either a joke or a story beat, it's almost always ways with Cuddles and Giggles. This is most notably seen in the Fall Out Boy music video for the Carpal Tunnel of Love, where the entire plot revolves around Cuddles and Giggles getting together. He's also commonly put in the spotlight by series co-creator and Cuddles voice actor Ken Navarro. Ken has stated that he doesn't really have a favorite character, but it's definitely clear that he has some amount of bias towards the character he's voiced since the very beginning. According to Ken,
I wish. I only have one voice when this is my voice, and it's Cuddles.
He says this, but we'll learn later that this is not true. When it comes to Happy Tree Friends merch, Cuddles is the king. Literally every single set of plushes features him, and that is something that not even Flippy can say. No matter what you think of Cuddles, he is a major part of the series brand, and you really can't go anywhere without seeing him. On the subject of Cuddles being simultaneously important and unimportant, let's see how he fared in the 2 official character polls. We'll be using these to show how a character's general popularity has changed over the course of the show. The first poll is incredibly old, from 2003, when the show had just started season 2. The second poll is from 2013, an entire 3 seasons later, including the bombshell that was the TV season. Needless to say, these 2 polls are very different. In the first poll, Cuddles scored 4th place with 6% of the votes. The second poll was tournament-based, and Cuddles was able to beat them all, before obviously being completely obliterated by Flippy. The actual vote numbers were never released for this, so this means there's not much to glean from his performance there. Overall, Cuddles seems to be a generally well-liked character, but due to his tendency to be a bit generic to some, I wouldn't really call him a fan favorite. Before we move on, let's talk about some of the other little tidbits and trivia about Cuddles that didn't really fit anywhere else. I figured if this is going to be a big analysis of every character, then why not go all out with it? Cuddles is one of the 5 characters who had their very own dedicated MySpace page in the 2000s, and on it we learn that he is an Aries, is single, and doesn't smoke or drink, in case that was something you were wondering about. Both on this page and on the blood sample DVDs, we learn that Cuddles loves carrot juice, but because of his beta-carotene intolerance, he can't actually drink it. He also has a toothbrush collection, and his skin burns easily, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because he's a rabbit, he's covered in fur. Whatever, it's a joke, who cares? This carrot fact is something that sparked a bit of confusion among fans, as in the Cuddles smoochie, he eats a carrot and starts to choke, which causes him to suffocate. The question is, was he choking because he was just choking? Or was it because he's actually allergic to carrots in the show, and this is why we never see him eat them in any other episode? Ken Navarro himself actually responded to a fan asking this question, and he said that Cuddles loves carrots and is not allergic. A similar scene in the show that can go both ways is Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, where Lumpy makes a carrot cake for Cuddles' birthday. Lumpy might have made this cake because Cuddles loves carrots, or because, you know, he's Lumpy, he just didn't know that Cuddles was allergic. So, which is it? Do you care? Now, let's move on to the show's most prominent female character, Giggles the Chipmunk. Did you know that in terms of appearances, Giggles is the 2nd most used character in the entire show? It's true. Only 1 character has more appearances than her, and when it comes to the brand as a whole, I'd say she's 3rd place behind Cuddles and Flippy. Her prominence in the series goes as far back as Banjo Frenzy, though unlike Cuddles, she actually went through some pretty major design changes. She has blue fur and a large tail, while the final design is obviously pink and has no tail, despite the fact that she is a chipmunk. You know, the animal that most definitely has a tail. Apparently she does have a tail, but you just can't see it. A likely story, I'm sure. A later concept drawing shows Giggles much closer to her final design, wearing a pair of roller skates and a floaty. While these elements were not part of her main design, she did actually go on to wear roller skates in the show, specifically in her TV series title card, as well as the episodes Concrete Solution and Buns of Steel. Whether or not this was an homage to the concept is up for interpretation. Despite this sketch showing Giggles with her head marking, for whatever reason, she just doesn't have it in the first episode. And because the intro cards for Season 1 used assets from said episode, every episode intro in the first season shows her without the marking. And it wasn't until Season 2 that they finally fixed it. Speaking of her head marking, I want to bring up how it's actually changed over the years. In Seasons 1 and 2, her head marking is only on the front of her head, leaving the back entirely pink. In the TV season and beyond, this was changed so that her head marking does appear on the back of her head. Interestingly, this change wasn't universal, as some of the merch of Giggles past this point still uses the pre-TV design. Outside of that though, her design hasn't really changed too much, and the same can mostly be said for her personality. For the majority of the series' run, Giggles was the epitome of the girl. She's pink, she has a bow, she has tea parties, she likes flowers and dress up, her best friend is the only other girl in the series, and she's usually involved in any plot that has romance. Considering how short the episodes in Season 1 were, this makes sense, and the same principle applies to basically every other character. Because Season 1 episodes were usually about a minute long, or even shorter, the characters all took on very simple archetypes that you might actually see in a kids show, for the simple sake of being clear. Otherwise, by the time a character was firmly established, there would be less than 10 seconds left in the episode to do anything. Giggles always had plenty of screen time, but her actual personality stayed pretty stagnant, up until the point where most characters got their big break, the TV season. Giggles had several starring roles in the TV season, and in general, it gave a sort of edge to her that has never really been seen prior, and arguably since. The most notable example of this is Every Litter Bit Hurts. In this episode, Giggles has a rivalry with Lumpy, who's carelessly hurting the environment. Giggles frequently tells him off and goes to extreme lengths to stop his pollution, from finding a group of volunteers to clean up, to fearlessly putting herself in the middle of the road to get Lumpy to stop his truck. This more heroic and activist side of Giggles did actually come back, in the series' take on Jack and the Beanstalk, Once Upon a Time. In this episode, she's shown to be a quick thinker who helps to save the other characters from Lumpy, although in the end this doesn't really end up working. Still though, she did try. That's the best you can really ask for a happy tree friend. It seemed like Giggles' character had finally been fully figured out, but these traits didn't really stick past the TV season. She didn't get very many starring roles in post-TV, and the fact that the episodes went from 7 minutes long back to 3 minutes long meant that she didn't really have that much time to do anything of note. It does make me wonder if Giggles' strong personality in Every Litter Bit Hurts was majorly caused by that episode being written by an outside writer, as opposed to the usual writing trio. So maybe that episode is more of an alternate interpretation, instead of full-on character development. You can also say this about Once Upon a Time, where while it is made by the show's usual writing trio, it is intentionally different from what the show usually does. Either way, Giggles has had some fun moments, and has been in some incredibly popular episodes, though in general, she's often seen as one of the more generic characters. While her personality may not have changed much, her voice did, in a three-way tie for most amount of recasts. Giggles, Petunia, and Cub have always been voiced by the same person at the same time. The first was Dana Belbin, who voiced the characters up until the end of Season 2. Compared to the others, Dana's voice is very animal-like and high-pitched. This was likely helped by the fact that at this point in the series, the voices were often pitch-shifted up in editing, a practice that was abandoned around the TV season. You can even hear this in cases where Dana's old lines were reused after this change. Speaking of Dana's incredibly loud, blood-curdling screaming, apparently it was so loud that it broke through the soundproofing in the studio.
You know, it's supposed to be soundproof, but people outside could hear her screaming always, and they'd be like, what are you doing?
After Dana left the show towards the end of Season 2, all of her voice roles were handed off to Ellen Connell, who would voice for the show up until the Season 3 episode Something Fishy. Ellen's voice for the three characters is noticeably more human, and in the case of Giggles and Petunia, more mature. Which makes sense considering that in the TV series, the characters are generally smarter and more adult due to the extended runtime allowing for more possibilities. Once the TV season ended, Ellen left in early Season 3, which led to the final voice for Giggles stepping in, Lori G. Now, Lori had actually voiced a character on the show before, one we'll get to much later, so this wasn't her first time voicing a happy tree friend. Lori's voice for Giggles keeps up the idea of her sounding more human, but in this case, she sounds more noticeably younger and higher pitched. On Unfortunately, we didn't get to hear much of Laurie's performance, as even after she was cast, several episodes still used Ellen Connell's voice. It's hard to say exactly why this is the case, as there are several possible reasons. It could be that Laurie was less of a replacement for Ellen and more of a backup in case Ellen wasn't available. Or it could be the other way around, in that they'd use archival clips of Ellen's voice when Laurie wasn't available to record new ones. Though it's hard to say for sure, as it's impossible for us to know if a unique clip was recorded for that particular episode or is just an unused take from a previous one. Moving on from her voice and into the merch scene, Giggles got a ton of love. She was in several major merch sets and was especially pampered in Japan. From what I can tell, Giggles got more Japanese merch than Flippy, and that's pretty crazy considering that she's not nearly as popular. Some notable Giggles merch includes the Comic-Con glow-in-the-dark bobblehead, the SK Japan walking plush, the MemoBot USB drives, and this particular design used on clothing. Freak Magnet. What are you trying to say, Mondo? Moving on to the fun facts about Giggles, she's the only character to have more than one title card in the TV series. By a technicality, and also not counting this Flippy one. In the episode Dunce Upon a Time, because she's poor, her bow is all tattered and patched up. Though it seems that when they changed her bow asset to achieve this, it consequently made her title card also have this tattered bow. This could be intentional, but who's to say? Another thing I found interesting about Giggles is that in several early sources, like the show website or the First Blood DVD, Giggles is said to be quote-unquote shy and sweet, which is probably just made up for the sake of flavor text, as I can't think of a single time she's really ever been shy. In fact, I'd argue that she's often the opposite. What I also find funny about these bios is that apparently Giggles likes crossword puzzles and writing poetry, despite there being literally no words of any kind in universe. Maybe her crosswords just look like this, I don't know. Similar to Cuddles, Giggles also has a MySpace page, and on it we can see that her star sign is Cancer. We also learn that alongside skipping rope and ice skating, things we have seen her do before, she apparently likes kickball, something she has never been seen playing. I know, I'm mad about it too. I do also want to point out some of the other stuff I could find on this page. Giggles gets freaky with HTF gear. That phrasing is perfect. I can't think of a single way that could be misinterpreted. Giggles t-shirt. This sweet shirt is sure to attract all kinds of attention. Wait, all kinds of attention? You know, there's like platonic, romantic, political, national, nuclear? Lip gloss. Make your lips happy with Giggles' Strawberry Scream. Okay, you're just asking for it at this point. When it comes to Giggles in the character polls, she was able to land 7th place in the original poll with 6% of the votes. And in the tournament, she was able to beat Lammy in the first round, but lost in the second round to Mime. And honestly, I think this says more about Mime than it says about Giggles. Now, I wasn't going to talk about this here, but I think it's relevant enough to talk about now. Giggles is the only character in the show to have a mother, or at the very least, the only one that we actually see. In the 3rd episode of the series, Helping Helps, we can clearly see Giggles' mom, who is basically just Giggles, but taller. You can tell that this was before the writers had really figured out the world and the rules of the show. As a reminder, this is the era of the show where they weren't even sure if Flippy was going to make the cut. Once the show found itself with time, Giggles' mom never showed up again, and thus she doesn't really have any character to speak of. Regardless, it is a cool part of the show's history. And thus concludes Giggles. So let's move on to the next of the original 4, Toothy. Toothy is one of the 2 beavers of the series, and he's pretty interesting, ironically because a lot of people find him uninteresting. Toothy is arguably one of the most important characters. He's one of the original 4, and he barely changed at all from his Banjo Frenzy design. And in general, his design has been pretty solid ever since. In Spin Fun Knowin Ya, and by association the Season 1 title cards, he's shown with some strands of hair on his head that never appeared in any other episodes. Something that's debated about Toothy's design is his tail. According to the Popcorn video on the First Blood DVD, Toothy's tail was surgically enlarged. However, Warren Graff, who very likely wrote that line, later said that this wasn't the case. Is this canon to the show or not? I don't know, go flip a coin. As his name implies, Toothy is, well, Toothy. His teeth are the longest of any characters, and they have a noticeable gap between them, a trait that is very often forgotten about. Seriously, there are so many times Toothy is just given regular teeth, it's kinda sad. Eye Candy, the most famous Toothy episode of them all, and one of the most famous episodes in the entire series? One of the few episodes to win an award? Yeah, Toothy is literally never shown with his gapped teeth in that episode. The DVD cover where he takes center stage? Regular teeth. He's one and only plush? Regular teeth. And to rub further salt in the wound, he also doesn't have his freckles. Even when an unreleased prototype plush was made later down the line, it still got his teeth wrong. Funnily enough, it took until the TV season for him to be animated consistently. Which is also the one season where he has literally no starring roles. Seriously, they had to make a fake-out episode just to show his title card. And as a reminder, even Crow Marmot got a TV starring role. And this brings me to Toothy's personality, or more accurately, his lack thereof. I have witnessed literal arguments between fans about what Toothy's personality is actually supposed to be. It's really that vague. Besides being similar to Cuddles and being there, Toothy really only has one recurring trait, being that he cries. Pretty often, actually. Now, plenty of other characters have cried in the show, but it's Toothy who does it the most. But is that meant to be his entire character, or just part of his character? Because if they need a character who can be a crybaby, wouldn't they just use Flaky, who's far more popular? So if crying isn't his character, what is his character? I've heard some people posit that maybe he's meant to be a little bit of a nerd, as he's shown to be a fan of Splendid on several occasions, even dressing up as him for Halloween. And yes, that is true, but that's also not exclusive to him, and if you're looking for that kind of character, Sniffles is very clearly the show's nerd. There's literally an entire episode about him going to a convention to meet Splendid, and even then, he's the in-universe equivalent of a celebrity. It only makes sense that most characters like him. Disco Bear was in line to get a signature. Does that make him a nerdy character? I'd say that Toothy is kind of like a less fortunate Petunia. What do I mean by that? Well, he initially started as basically just a copy of another character, but unlike Petunia, he never got the time to carve out his own niche. In the end, I think it's just a simple case of the writers not figuring out his personality, and considering the current state of the show, I doubt Toothy is high on the priority list. Onto his voice, there's really not much to say. He's been played by Warren Graff since day one, and Warren still works on the show, so I doubt that will ever change. Now there is one thing I want to discuss, as I've heard this said, and I've even stated it myself before in a video. In the episode Keepin' It Real, Warren apparently wasn't available to voice Toothy, and thus Ken Navarro had to voice Toothy for this episode. I feel like I've seen a source for this, but I just can't find it. It's not in any of the DVD commentaries, it's not in the blurb for the episode, and in general, I just can't verify it. Even just listening to the clips, to me at least, it sounds like Warren, and one of the clips is literally reused from Eye Candy. Don't believe me? Here's the clip in Eye Candy. And here's Keepin' It Real. And while there are clips I couldn't find in previous episodes, they sound very similar to Eye Candy. Seriously, take a listen. I don't know about you, but I think those sound pretty similar. The biggest piece of evidence for this claim is the fact that Warren is not credited in this episode, but Ken is. Cuddles is in the episode, but isn't voiced. While I don't think this so-called fact is necessarily wrong, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they just forgot to credit Warren. The show has had crediting errors before, so it wouldn't be a unique case. Outside the show, Toothy is actually quite prominent, just like Cuddles. He's all over the marketing for the show, and a lot of that is attributed to Eye Candy being a very iconic episode. Despite this, his merch showings are kind of inconsistent. He was in the Hunter Leisure plush set, but as I mentioned, he's very off-model with normal teeth and no freckles. Even on the larger sizes he lacks these details, which is pretty lame if you ask me. He did have 2 Trexie figures and one from the Minifigure World series, but none of them are particularly noteworthy. That is, if you're only counting figures that actually released. He was intended to be one of the lucky few characters to get an SEG figure, SEG being the most popular and sought-after company for Happy Tree Friends figures. This figure was cancelled when SEG went out of business, and prototype images are all we have. Here's an interesting bit of Toothy merch from my own collection. The official Toothy Halloween costume. These costumes are a fascinating piece of history, and while they do look strange, they're still really cool collector's items. As for random facts and other stuff, just like his character, Toothy is pretty barren in that regard. However, there's one fact I would bet money on you never noticing before, as it's extremely subtle. In Toothy's Season 1 intro card, his head is very slightly transparent, allowing you to see the rest of his hair strand through it. This is very hard to see, and you might need to mess with your brightness settings or move your screen around, but I assure you, it is there. Checking the flash file, we can see what actually caused this. Instead of being 100% opaque, somebody messed up and it's 99% opaque. You would think this would apply to Fun Knowin Ya considering it uses the same asset, but no. That's because the characters on the merry-go-round are actually one giant asset and thus have a separate, correct opacity value. When it comes to polls, Toothy is, again, not bad, but not amazing either. In 2003, he landed 8th place with 4% of the votes. Honestly, probably carried by eye candy. I mean, look at this episode, it's really good, especially for the time. In the 2010s, he didn't get very far, with a good start beating Disco Bear in round 1, before being promptly eliminated by Flaky in round 2. I think it's safe to say he never stood a chance. Is there anything else to say about Toothy? No. Not really. Play the Dirty Shorts clip again.
And I know who did it too! And I'll tell you, as soon as I have a sip of my delicious beverage.
Apparently Warren doesn't remember doing this at all, and honestly, I think that makes it funnier. Moving on to the final character of the original 4, we have the one, the only, Lumpy the Moose. And wow, there is so much to say about Lumpy. So let's start with his design and development. Lumpy by far went through more design changes and development than any other character, changing species twice. He was originally a bear, but then changed to a dinosaur. You might recognize this design as it's the one that was used in Banjo Frenzy. Speaking of which, Banjo Frenzy shows Lumpy to be far more aggressive than in the final show, and it seems that until Flippy came along, the idea of a character becoming suddenly aggressive was planned to be for Lumpy. It seems that the idea of Lumpy being a moose didn't pop up until late into pre-production, as there are no known concept drawings of his final design. And that brings us to his personality, which is very easy to see. Lumpy is dumb, by far the stupidest character, and for this show, that is an accomplishment. Despite this core trait being so obvious, his actual personality isn't entirely consistent, and that's by design. Lumpy being stupid makes him fit basically any role, and thus he often changes his personality to fit whatever the story needs, with his stupidity being the only constant. He can be a greedy boss with no morals, a goofy sidekick, a construction worker, a southern farmer, a chaperone for a bunch of rowdy kids, a well-meaning but short-tempered protagonist, and the list just goes on from there. A lot of the time, Lumpy is basically the show's get-out-of-jail-free card, where if they can't think of somebody specific to lead or support an episode, they just use Lumpy because they know he will work. I'm going a bit out of order here, but I think in this case it's too relevant to ignore. Because of his versatility, Lumpy is a clear favorite of the writers, and this is very, very easy to notice. He appears more than any other character, and it's really not close. The runner-up is Giggles, who appears in about 90 episodes. Lumpy appears in 120 episodes, and that number clearly isn't going to be stopping anytime soon. In the TV season alone, he stars in over a dozen of the 39 episodes, and as a reminder, Cuddles only got 1 starring role, and Toothy got 0. When you consider how many characters this show has, that's pretty crazy. The writers literally had to stop themselves from using Lumpy at points, as they started to notice that most of the season was about him. Though it seems that this restraint was completely lost by the end of the TV season, as post-TV, you might as well just rename the series The Lumpy Show, with how often he's used. Season 3 has 26 episodes. You want to know how many feature Lumpy? 20. Of 26, in episodes half the length of the TV season. Season 4 doesn't fare much better, as of the 9 episodes in the season, Lumpy's in all but 2 of them. In case it wasn't obvious, this got very tiring for a lot of fans, myself included. It's not that Lumpy isn't a good character, I personally think he's hilarious. It's just that in a show with such a big cast, you eventually start to miss the lesser used characters. I've shown the series to multiple people, and by the time we get to post-TV, it's basically always just, I wonder what they're gonna do with Mime or Disco Bear in this season. Oh, it's Lumpy again. Yay. And even then, there are lots of people who don't even like Lumpy in the first place, as in general, he's pretty controversial. His lack of awareness makes some people see him as cruel. And for the record, there are literally times where he's written to be that way. That, combined with his oversaturation, makes him a pretty polarizing character, and it's not too uncommon to see him at the bottom of somebody's character tier list. And you can also see this in the polls. In the 2000s poll, when the overall character appearance rates were decently balanced, Lumpy was second place with 16% of the vote, 10% higher than third place. However, in the 2010s poll, Lumpy failed to win a single round and was immediately outvoted by Splendid, a character who's far less frequently used, just as, if not more divisive, and in general isn't very common in the show or the brand as a whole. If you need proof that the fans were sick of Lumpy post-TV, this is really all you need. Getting back on track, let's talk about his voice. Lumpy was originally played by series co-creator and character designer Rody Mondijo, who also played Splendid. Around 2004, when Rody left the show, his roles were handed over to the person in the office with the lowest voice they could find, artist and animator David Wynn. You may remember me mentioning how in the early days of the show, the characters sounded a lot more animal-like, both due to the voices being pitched up and the show being brand new. Lumpy, however, arguably sounded less human as the show progressed, as Rhodey's voice for him often just sounds like a mumbly guy. David Wynn's Lumpy generally sounds a lot more stupid and cartoony, keeping the same general tone, and even the same girly screams. Because David took over the role just before the TV season, the season where Lumpy basically became the show's main character, he very likely recorded more lines than any other actor for the show ever did. And as you probably could guess, doing this for hours at a time isn't really the best for your throat. In the words of the man himself,
it's completely physically exhausting, and I can't really speak the next day. But that's Happy Tree Friends.
Now, in terms of Lumpy's presence outside the show itself, by comparison, it's fairly tame. He is featured in some of the games. For example, in False Alarm, he's sort of playable, but not really. He just sits in the corner and reacts based on how well you're doing. In earlier versions of the game, he was meant to play a more crucial role, and the cover art also implies this. In the end, the game went through several revisions, leaving him with little to do. In both Dead-Eye Derby and the Crack Pet Show DLC, he isn't playable and is more of a host. In fact, for the Crack Pet Show, he's just a reskin for the original game's host, meaning that he actually speaks real words, albeit through text, but it's still kinda weird. While he wasn't too prominent in the mobile or console games, he was decently present in the online Flash games, though it's up to you to decide if they really count because many of them are just reskins of other games. Lumpy was also the host of this weird thing on the German TV Volume 2 DVD.
Willkommen zu Lumpys Handy Game Tipp. Heute präsentiert dir Lumpy Flippy's Flying Frenzy.
Yeah, for some reason this DVD has a Lumpy-themed demo video for the Flippy's Flying Frenzy mobile game. And as you can see, he repurposes animation from I Get a Trick Out of You. He even still has the cuffs from his outfit. And the best part? Lumpy is literally not in this game anywhere. If there's any area where Lumpy is weirdly absent, it's the merch scene. Yeah, he does have some clothing items and other various products, but compared to how much he's actually in the show, it can appear pretty light. His biggest merch is definitely his two plushes, by Hunter Leisure and Play-by-Play respectively. They look quite similar, but the Play-by-Play one has posable limbs and an eye that you can remove. When it comes to figures though, Lumpy is sorely lacking. He was meant to have an SEG figure that had a breakable antler and what looks to be either a whoopee cushion or maybe a deflated balloon, but just like Toothy, he was never officially released. Lumpy actually only got one released figure, and it's this one, based on By the Seat of Your Pants? Really? From the fact this episode was dedicated to a fan, got other merch, and was even shown off at conventions, it seems that the crew just really liked the episode. But it's still kinda weird to me that this is the one figure Lumpy ever got. It was made by the company Assemble and was an online exclusive, making it fairly obscure. When you think about it, it actually makes sense why Lumpy was excluded from so many major sets, and it's most likely his body shape. Because he's completely unlike the other characters physically, you can't just copy-paste the body of another character and make some tweaks. You'd have to make a brand new design. This isn't helped by the fact that he probably wouldn't fit into most boxes because of his size, especially with things like blind boxes which are meant to be small and uniform. You'd either have to make the box weirdly big, or Lumpy weirdly small, and neither is really a great option. Strangely, Japan didn't even make any notable Lumpy merch, showing that they either didn't find him marketable enough, or they just didn't want to bother making him work. It's probably a little bit of both. On to the other facts about Lumpy, he also had a MySpace page, and there's some interesting stuff on it. Lumpy is a Capricorn, his favorite dessert is cheesecake, which if I may mention, he has never eaten in the show, and he voted for Lammy to be added to the show in 2010. I will say, it's kinda weird reading first-person text from Lumpy of all people, even more so than the others. Besides shirtless sunbathing, I like nothing more than to cater to the whims and delights of our favorite woodland creatures. I also talked to Lettuce. All this does is remind me that Lumpy, despite not wearing any clothes, apparently can take his shirt off and has been shown to do so in several episodes. Lumpy is also the first character we've talked about so far that has an asymmetrical design element, in this case being his antlers. I was thinking about saying something like, here's a drinking game, watch some Lumpy episodes and drink every time his antlers switch places, but honestly, that is basically a one-way ticket to alcohol poisoning. Seriously, I don't think there's a single Lumpy episode past season 1 where this doesn't happen at least once. There are several times they swap places literally within the same scene. You might think that this is an error, but in many cases it's actually intentional. Lumpy's model sheet states that his antlers are always supposed to face the same direction as his snout. This makes sense and it's not uncommon in animation, but despite this note, it's not always followed, and there are plenty of shots where Lumpy's antlers don't abide by it. This is something that plagues literally every character in the show with an asymmetrical design element, and it's due to the fact that the show is made in Flash. Because frames are made with rigs, which are essentially puppets and not brand new hand-drawn images, simply flipping an asset can make things inconsistent if it's not symmetrical. Overall, Lumpy's in a kinda weird position. He's basically the main character of the show with how much he's in the episodes, and when it comes to the advertising, he's all over it. But in terms of popularity in other media, he's actually fairly low on the list compared to some others. Though regardless of what you think of him, it's pretty clear to see that Lumpy isn't going anywhere, even if he eats up 90% of the runtime. And with that, that's all of the original 4 characters analyzed in detail. And yes, the plan is to eventually cover all the main characters via future parts. If there are any notable facts you think I missed, or an opinion you don't agree with, let me know in the comments. And with all that said, see you next time.